Welcome, everyone, to episode 422 of Just Joshing. I'm your host, Joshua Pentalaresco. I write stuff in Podcast 2, and today, Robert J. Sawyer joins the podcast. This kind of was a cursed conversation. I kind of call it why, because literally anything that could go wrong did go wrong. My computer broke down a week prior when we were scheduled to meet. It broke down. Then literally 15 minutes before I was supposed to interview him, the power went out where I was getting interviewed. It was just like, this was literally a modern miracle that things kind of worked out the way they did. However, Rob is Rob, man. He's kicking butt. The Oppenheimer Alternative is on, and it's amazing. And it's Rob Sawyer doing independent publishing and having a blast doing it. And it's a great conversation. I think every author should definitely listen to it. Plus, I'm kind of just waiting to hear back from my client in terms of audiobooks. I finished. I'm going to be finishing hour 2 tonight, and then hour 3, pretty much an hour a day for the next few weeks. And I'm excited about this because it's definitely been an opportunity. And I started an Instagram thing as well. Just Joshing Podcast is my Instagram. If you want to find my Instagram, I'm going to be doing basically inspirational stuff, and I'm going to be talking about my guests and my episodes. I even show some behind the scenes process on my audiobooks on there, maybe. But anyways, we'll get to all that later. But first, let's get to that conversation with Rob Sawyer, shall we?
This episode of Just Joshing is sponsored by Indie Imprint. Indie Imprint supports creators by creators. Whether you are writing a book or creating a video game, Indie Imprint works with its clients to produce, edit, and present their projects to the world. For more information, check out their website at www.indieimprint.com.
All right. So I'm going to start by saying, ladies and gentlemen, this has literally been the cursed interview. Literally 15 minutes before this interview went out, the power went out this time. Last time, my computer died. So hopefully this will last through the whole interview. But my guest today is the one and only Robert J. Sawyer. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Josh. How are you?
Better now. Unbelievable. But first and foremost, just kind of want to say congrats. Last time we talked, you were going back into publishing, and now you seem to be doing quite well for yourself.
Well, thank you. You're absolutely right. 4 years ago, my 23rd novel came out. It was called Quantum Night. It was published in Canada by Penguin Random House and by Ace, part of Penguin Random House in the United States, the science fiction imprint there. And I did think it was going to be my final novel. I had thought I'd run out of things I wanted to say as a novelist. I'd won every award that was worth winning in my field, and I'm quite surprised to be here talking to you about a new book. The Oppenheimer Alternative, number 24, came out tomorrow as we record this. It'll be 3 months to the day since it came out, and it's getting great reviews and selling really well, and I'm very pleased.
Well, so I'm going to say something here. I'm not surprised you're back, but I think maybe the biggest difference is maybe why you're back. What changed?
Well, a number of things, but one was that the publishing industry changed. I've been with 4 of the big 5 publishing houses. The big 5 New York houses are Hachette. My first novel was the Macmillan. I did like a dozen novels with their Tor science fiction imprint. Penguin Random House, close to a dozen with their Ace science fiction imprint. One with HarperCollins. The only one I haven't been with is Simon & Schuster. And every year they get more and more rapacious about what they want from the author and how little they will give back to the author. So when I started, all they wanted was print rights in their domestic territory, the United States, and they wanted Canada to throw in. Okay. Then they started wanting world English rights. Then they started wanting ebook rights. And then they started wanting audiobook rights as well. And all the while cutting back on how much promotion they were doing. Advertising for books has all but disappeared. And I thought, this is just nuts. They're taking more and more and giving less and less. And the self-publishing, not that I'm self-publishing, it's a hybrid for sure, but the self-publishing options and the small press options have really matured even in the last 4 years substantially. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go to a mid-sized publisher and say, look, the big boys, it's all non-negotiable with them on these things. But, for you, I'm a big name. Let's talk. And I found an American publisher, Kasich Books, and a Canadian publisher, Fitzhenry and Whiteside, both of which were willing to say, sure, what kind of deal do you want? And I said, you get print in one country, and that's it. No audio, no ebooks, nothing else. And they said, sure, yay, let's go to work. And so the Oppenheimer Alternative came out on a hybrid basis, with me publishing it in print everywhere except Canada, the United States, and an ebook and audio everywhere in the world, directly controlling those rights myself.
Which actually, in one sense, is a good evolution. When we first talked, way back when I started this podcast, you were talking about when we were doing like the self-publishing models. Like, it's big when you look at the big names turning down the big houses. You're a pretty big name, and you're kind of like looking at the big houses in a lot different light now. Would you go back, or at this point, are you happy with what you're doing?
I am very happy, and I haven't given a fair test to my two mid-sized publishers because nobody could give them a fair test over the last 3 months because of COVID-19.
Yeah.
The month my book came out, almost every brick-and-mortar bookstore in North America was closed. So yes, the print copies that were shipping out of Amazon in Canada and the U.S. or Chapters Indigo, our big brick-and-mortar but also online bookseller in Canada, absolutely those were being supplied by my print publisher. But my book tour fell by the wayside. My book launch party by the wayside. Any literary festivals, there's a circuit of them in Canada, I would have been doing with the assistance of my Canadian publisher, and the whole panoply of North American science fiction conventions I would normally be doing as well. All of that came to a dead stop. Next time out, I might be inclined to just do the whole shebang myself. And yet I'm waiting to see. The beauty of ebook publishing is I can look every day and see how many copies I sold yesterday. Mm-hmm. Right? I can get up to the day before the tally of how much I made.
Yeah.
My book came out June 2nd. I have to wait till October 31st for my first royalty statements from the American and Canadian publishers. So I won't even know for another 2 months whether the book sold at all well in print through them.
And like you said, in 2020 isn't really a fair litmus test because there's a lot of handcuffs right now. Right?
That's exactly it, yeah. So nobody knows, right? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
And we'll see, we'll see how my publishers feel. They obviously had to pay, advances against royalties. They put an investment in producing the book. They may have felt that they kind of got screwed over by COVID-19 and may, not that either of them are precarious, but all publishing is precarious right now. So let us hope when I'm ready to do another book that they're still around and we can have a mature adult conversation about whether or not we want to, get between the covers again, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I think this is going to be really interesting. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I've been kind of just doing things on my own, and there's a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of... I think the interesting thing going forward with a lot of publishers is, okay, someone like you, what can they offer you that you can't get on your own today? Right? Because that's
exactly, that's the huge question. Because, over the years, I have been sent on book tours by publishers. I have had ads in the Toronto subway cars paid for by Penguin Random House. I've had ads in Locust and Publishers Weekly paid for by my publishers. But now, I just got today's issue, the first September issue of Locust. It's a monthly, the trade journal, the science fiction field. And none of the big publishers are advertising in Locust anymore. They're not sending authors, except if your first name is Neil and your last name is Gaiman, off on a book tour. They've just cut back to the bare bones in what they put into promoting a book because they're hoping that a book will somehow take off because of some social media virality that happens, either because the author did something or an influencer had noticed the book and given it a boost. But they don't even try anymore. Now, my mid-sized U.S. publisher, Kasich, has been doing a fabulous job, half-page ad in Locus for my novel. They have an ad coming up next week in Publishers Weekly for their current 3 science fiction books. But the big 5, man, they're not bringing anything to the table.
Well, and that's the thing. Like I've been debating like a hybrid model for myself, but I'm thinking, well, the only way I go to a publisher now is, what are you giving me that I can't get on my own? Because if I'm getting something on my own, I don't need the prestige. I just would rather be paid. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Now, from my point of view, when I started in this game, there's always been self-publishing. It way predates me being in the field, and my first novel came out 30 years ago. But we called it Vanity Press. There was no online distribution. There was no distribution at all. And having a publisher who, was giving quite literally their imprint to your work was a way of getting credibility. Any idiot can publish a book. 30 years ago they could, and today they can too. How do you separate the wheat from the chaff? Well, the simplest thing for the book buyer was simply to buy books in a real bookstore published by a credible New York or Toronto publisher. But nowadays, there are other ways to gain that credibility. Certainly from my point of view, with 23 books from the big 5 publishing companies and 63 different awards, including the top awards in my field for my work, there's nothing they bring me in terms of credibility that I don't already have.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've done it all. So you're actually in probably the most enviable position of most writers, in the sense is you can have fun and you can kind of do what you want to do. So,
well, at this point in my career, I don't need to write a book to put food on the table. I've had my career. I'm 60 years old now, 60. I've had my career. I've planned well for years of not earning money, except passively through royalties, investment income, and so forth. So the only reason to write another book is because another book challenges me, and that's indeed what happened with the Oppenheimer Alternative. I thought I've done everything that I ever thought about doing as a creative challenge, and then it hit me. I've never written a book where I didn't make up the characters, where all the characters are real and famous historical figures. And that changed everything. It was a game changer. I had to learn these characters instead of devising these characters. And that was enough of an exciting challenge as a writer to make me want to get out of bed and hit the keyboard each morning.
And you've been working on this for a few years now. I've seen you. This seems to have been your baby. So
yeah. You've been out at writing retreats in Calgary that I've been at, and I've been working at the same book, for 4 years now. The first year of that was entirely just research, getting to know these characters through their own writings, through the biographies that have been written about them. I'm writing historical characters, but they're recent enough that there's lots of film and radio recording, some television of them, that I could look and see how they talked, what their gait was like when they walked, how they talked when they were talking to a peer versus how they talked when they thought they were talking to a lay person. And all of that informed the characterization that I brought to the Oppenheimer Alternative.
Well, I think those, like the characters in that era, I think for us in the 20th century, the 30s and the 40s was probably both eras were incredibly interesting to me, because the 30s, there was a lot of discovery going on, and I kind of look at what's going on today. There are parallels there. Hopefully it doesn't end like it did in the 40s, but there are parallels. And you got people like Oppenheimer, but you also have, Albert Einstein. You have so many people from that era with just so many, they had different ways of looking at the world. And it's fascinating to see. I think everybody has their own take on them. So what did you bring to it? What interested you about these particular characters?
It's been said that all great fiction is about redemption. It's not about the journey the character takes in the current story, but the journey the character takes to make up for whatever the character has done wrong earlier in life. And a classic example, I love this series of novels mystery novels by Ellis Peters, the Brother Cadfael mysteries.
Oh, wow.
Set during the Crusades, right?
Yeah.
Now, Cadfael was a crusader. He was a libertine. He was a carouser and a womanizer, and he was part of the pillaging of the Islamic world that happened during the Crusades. And later in life, he came to realize he had to atone for that, and he entered a monastery and became Brother Cadfael. But as Ellis Peters contrives it, he keeps running into murder and crimes being committed that the other monks and the nuns and so forth are completely unprepared to deal with. But because of his worldly experience, he can deal with them. But it's a redemption story for Brother Cadfael, right? So what I realized is that with only two exceptions, every major character who was involved with the creation of the atomic bombs came to regret having done so. Two exceptions are General Leslie R. Groves, who was the actual head of the Manhattan Project, and Edward Teller, who thought the atomic bomb wasn't big enough and went on to be the father of the hydrogen bomb, 1,000 times more devastating, and still wasn't satisfied. But except for those two maniacs, everybody else said at one point, either immediately after Hiroshima or after Nagasaki 3 days later, or 20 years down the road, or in the case of Leo Szilard, years before they'd even finished the bomb, that they were making a horrible mistake. And I wanted to have an opportunity through an alternate history scenario to give each of these guys an opportunity to come to reckoning with and maybe find some emotional peace about what they brought on the civilians in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 150,000 of whose deaths they're directly responsible for, but also the 75 years of the specter of nuclear Armageddon that every one of the 8 billion of us currently alive on the planet lives with every night when we go to bed.
Wow, okay. So redemption. So, was it because how to put this? Was it because you thought about like redemption in terms of just fiction, or I'm not to pry too personally, but I mean, are you looking at kind of a bit of your own life because of the mistakes you've made going through it? Because everybody does.
Well, everybody does. You know, my father, who died at 94 years of age, told me several years ago, all he's got left is regret. You know, he had a very successful career. He was professor emeritus of economics at the University of Toronto. He's listed in Canadian Who's Who. He's, raised 3 fine young men. Had a marriage that lasted half a century. But at the end, all that haunted his memories and kept running through his thoughts were whatever things he had screwed up. We all are like that. We're all like that. But there wasn't a particular resonance in this particular novel. It was just, I haven't done anything, and I like to think you haven't either, nearly as bad as wiping out 50,000 civilians.
Oh God, no. I've done terrible things, but nothing like on that scale, right?
That scale is almost unfathomable.
Yeah.
And unlike, there's really no way you can ever do a redemption story for the people who were directly involved in the Holocaust and Nazi Germany. There's no way anybody but a madman like Hitler could say, it seemed like a good idea at the time, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of the atomic bomb, these guys, Oppenheimer, and Edward Teller, Enrico Fermi, Hans Bethe, Albert Einstein, every one of them said, it seemed like a good idea at the time, and came to realize what I think is the theme of the book, which is that the world would be a much better place if the greatest people in it didn't just go blithely ahead and make whatever it was that the stupidest people in it asked them to make. There's not a general in the world who can make an atomic weapon on his or her own. He or she needs scientists to say, you want an atomic bomb? You want a hydrogen bomb? You want a laser-based defense system? You want sharks with freaking laser beams? I can do that for you. And instead of saying, maybe it's not the brightest idea to give a loaded revolver to a child.
No, it's actually a terrible idea. That's almost it's a hell of a paradigm to what's going on today. One of the things I realized during this time is that a lot of political decisions really the reason they can be made is because really smart people allow it to happen, and the people making those decisions aren't always the brightest people. And I realized that, and I actually got a little depressed with that thought. It's like, what can we do to change that?
Yes, and if there is a message I want to come out of this, is Leo Szilard, who is one of my main characters. He's the guy who first came up with the notion of a self-sustaining atomic chain reaction, which gave rise to both our nuclear power plants and to atomic weaponry. He said, we scientists, the one good thing that came out of this is we scientists are being listened to. After World War II, every one of the people involved in the Manhattan Project who was a senior scientist was being interviewed on, the CBS, they didn't have 60 Minutes back then, but they had Edward R. Murrow. They had their great primetime news shows, and was many of them on the cover of Time magazine and were considered to be pundits and experts. And we were listening to scientists about matters of public policy. Politics. Oppenheimer was against this initially, but Szilard said, no, we are the best and the brightest minds of the planet. People got to listen to us. And what we have now is a drift away from that. Instead of listening to Anthony Fauci, the top infectious disease expert in the United States, people listen to Donald Trump, who has no agenda other than getting reelected. And I did not, and I couldn't possibly claim to have had that particular example in mind when I wrote because I finished it before Trump was elected. But the example I did have in mind is still very much with us, which is climate change. Mm-hmm. We have all kinds of experts. 99% of the climatologists in the world are absolutely in agreement that the climate is changing in a way that will be detrimental to the human species, changing because of actions by the human species, and that we either are just before, right at, or lamentably just after the tipping point at which anything further will not be able to be done to ameliorate the situation. And yet we listen instead. We say, well, there's one guy over here, 99 guys over there. Who knows who's right? Guys who are right. We listen to politicians. We listen to, Alberta, a province that's near to both of our hearts.
Oh, God.
Is a province that failed to do what other Canadian economies that used to be oil and gas economies did. I used to be writer-in-residence in Saskatoon, and one of the principal things the Saskatchewan government set about doing was prairie economic diversification. And I was writer-in-residence at the Canadian Light Source, Canada's largest synchrotron, a world-class particle physics facility that they decided to build in Saskatoon because oil and gas and canola crops weren't going to sustain. They knew in the 21st century. But Alberta said, no, we're going to stay a fossil fuel economy despite the whole world moving away from that. And now, of course, they're facing the worst economic crisis of any province. We used to think the Maritimes were the have-not provinces in Canada, but they've been more sensible in managing their economic affairs during this time of crisis than Alberta has.
I shudder to think what Alberta's going to look like. So when I left Alberta to go to BC, I was looking at what I had in my head. I thought, okay, in 2 years he's going to fuck this up. That's literally what was in my head. In 2 years, COVID let him do it and to get to where I thought he'd get in 2 years and 3 months. Like, well, this is not going to be fun for you guys. I'm glad I'm out of the province. I hate what I'm at. Now, granted, we live in Ontario, and I don't know about you, but I wouldn't buy a car from Doug Ford. That's just me. But I mean, but for all of that, I think honestly, when we come right down to it, I think the issue we're facing two issues. The first is the world's changing. I think again, as you said earlier, we're moving away from fossil fuels, which for the last 100 or so years has been the source of power for our civilizations. And now that we're moving away from that, something new is developing. But I think what's happening is like anything that's dying, you cling to whatever you can hold on to for as long as you can. And especially like when I look at the United States in particular, my dad grew up on Perry Street in Detroit, Michigan during 1968 when the tanks rolled in.
Oh yeah.
Right? Well, 55 years later, they're in the exact same spot. Like contrary, like one thing I'm not defending this, but I will say this: Trump's not the first one to do a pandemic like this in the United States. He's the fourth, right? Nixon, Woodstock happened during a pandemic. So in one sense, I am not surprised what's going on down there. But the problem is, they've been in this same cycle for 50 years. The world has changed and they have not.
Yes.
This crisis, they will limp out of. But 10 years from now, 12 years from now, whatever's going to come next, God only knows what's going to come out of that. I have no idea.
You know, I mentioned my father a little while ago, an economics professor, but he also, one of his jobs over the years was he was in charge of the MBA program at the School of Business at the University of Toronto, now the Schulich School of Business. And you look at, there are two ways. There's the one way you mentioned, which is when something is on the decline, you hold on for dear life, and then you ultimately fail. Yeah. And the other way is you pivot. And I'm a great consumer of movies at home. There were two big companies, Blockbuster, which rented out video cassettes, and there was Netflix, which mailed DVDs to the United States Postal Service to people's house. Remember how that used to work?
Yes.
You would fill out a list of the DVDs you wanted in order, and they would send you one at a time, and as you returned one, the next one would be shipped out. And they said physical media is coming to an end, and pivoted to streaming, and are one of the most successful entertainment companies in the world. Whereas Blockbuster continued to hold on to distributing physical media. Oh, sure, they shifted from VHS to mostly DVD when that shift happened, but they didn't fundamentally alter the paradigm, and of course they don't exist anymore. Barnes & Noble and Borders controlled American book selling for 40 years and held on to the notion that people coming into bookstores is how books will always sell. Jeff Bezos comes along, and first he says, no. Delivering books to home physically is step one. And then step two is the Kindle. Eliminate the physical delivery altogether, because that's the costly thing. And Jeff Bezos is now the richest man in the world. So this clinging to the old paradigm, no matter how many times you point out to people, if you do that, you're going to be Barnes & Noble, which is on the verge of bankruptcy, Borders, which is out of business and bankrupt, you're going to be Blockbuster, you're going to be endless number, you're going to be, Motorola or BlackBerry, which were the leaders in cellular phones and smartphones, right? And now, or Palm, which was the leader in personal digital assistants, you're going to be completely forgotten companies because you cling to an old way of doing things. BlackBerry, I love BlackBerry, but they clung to the physical keyboard over the touch screen for only, a year, 18 months longer than they should have. That was enough to kill them.
Well, no, that's the thing. Like we're coming to. I really hate new normal as a marketing buzzword, but but the world is changing. Like you can see it. You can literally see it around you all the time. Like I know, like in 5 to 10 years, the storefront. Even now, like this is being reevaluated right now. The storefront is going to be completely different next year. You look at, the workspaces, working from home is going to be a lot more normal than it used to be, and it's never going to go back to the office spaces. So the world is evolving and changing, and hopefully going to a brighter future. It's my hope anyway. I
agree with you. I totally agree with you, Josh. We've hit the reset switch.
Yes.
And, people sometimes say, I have some arguments on Facebook, people will say, the Black Lives Matter people or the trans rights people or whatever group is upset at the moment, can't they just wait till the damn epidemic is over, right? We got something else on our plate right now. No. The reset switch has been hit. Everything is going to be reformulated, redesigned, restructured when we come out of this pandemic. And now is the time for systemic change across the board. It's easy to restructure everything all at once. It's easy to renovate your entire house. It's a nightmare if you try to do a room at a time forever, right? So absolutely this is the time to reform our policing. Absolutely this is the time to sort out what we're going to do about the rights for trans people to fully realize and enjoy their destiny and their pursuit of happiness, which the United States are entitled to under the Constitution. All of this reform is happening in conjunction with a worldwide pandemic because it's the right time to reform everything as we come out of it.
Yes. And there's going to be good, there's going to be bad, we're going to make mistakes, but inevitably the future comes one day at a time. And that's the nature of the world. Everything changes. So.
Well, absolutely. And it changes. Sometimes it changes overnight. I mean, we're talking about Black Lives Matter right now. Remember, some of the people who are out there marching, some of the non-black people out there marching in solidarity with black people now were part of the racist community 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's not just that things change generationally. People's views have changed enormously on policing, on the value and worth of every human being and the joy to be found in diversity and multiculturalism. In people's visceral dislike they might have had at one point over gay marriage. It's impossible to even conceive now of marriage rights being backtracked anywhere in North America, right? They're entrenched and everybody, what were we upset about again? I can't even remember, right? So people change. It's not just societies that change. And so even though this might, we hope, be a very short interregnum here, COVID lockdown started depending on when you are, what jurisdiction, February or March of 2020. We're hoping we'll be out by, realistically, February or March of 2021. If we're lucky, 2022. If we're not, but even if it's 2023, it's still a very short window. We're going to pivot out of it and be a completely different world.
Absolutely. So, I'll ask you a really big question as the finale for the interview, and then we'll get to plugging your stuff. What do you hope comes from the future? Like, for the next, let's assume, my gut tells me by next summer we'll be probably most of the way through it. If not completely out, most of the way through it. Assuming
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah, I
am an optimist. My science fiction tends towards, even shades towards maybe the utopian as we move farther into the future. There's no question that the world today, despite all the politicking that says nothing has changed since Martin Luther King marched on Washington in 1963. In fact, an enormous amount has changed, including there having been a black president of the United States, including apartheid coming to the end in South Africa, including there having been a black governor general of Canada. You can go down the list, right? Or black governor general of Ontario, I should say, my province, Patrick. You can go down a lot has changed. A lot more still to be changed. But there's no question that, as King himself said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We're looking at a future that is better and brighter for everybody, where we go back to being able to say with a straight face that those that we empower with upholding our laws are peace officers, right? They're not riot control, and they're not some self-appointed vigilantes, and they're not people that blacks or whites or anybody opportunities. I've seen it because I live in Toronto, the most, according to UNESCO, the most multicultural city in the world. And I've seen it when I go as a guest speaker to high school classes or junior high classes as a writer. The young people, a rainbow mixture of everybody, and because they're a new generation, whatever prejudice and interpersonal conflict, they know bullying ain't cool. They know that somebody else who eats different food from you maybe has something interesting to swap with you for lunch instead of being somebody that you should shun. The world is always slower than we wish, but inexorably always moving towards the positive. King was right. We are bending towards justice.
Awesome. Well, I think this is the wonderful time where you get to plug your stuff, so why don't you go ahead and do it?
The Oppenheimer Alternative, my 24th novel, is out everywhere. As the saying goes, that good books are sold in physical, beautiful trade paperback, in ebook, and in audiobook. Just today, the bestsellers list for Locus, the trade journal of the science fiction and fantasy field, came out. Monthly bestsellers list, the Oppenheimer Alternative is number 1. The reviews have been spectacular, and you can find out more about it on my website. I was the first science fiction writer in the world to have a website, so I got a great URL. It's sfwriter.com. S is in science, F as in fiction, writer.com. And on social media, mostly where you'll find me is Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. I'm Robert J. Sawyer with no punctuation and no spaces. Robert J. Sawyer.
Let me help you tell your story. I offer a variety of audio services. I will narrate, I will produce, I will edit, and I will master your file so that it will be ready for Audible and Spotify. And if you don't want me to narrate your story, whether you want to do it or get someone else, I will help you find the right person for the job. All in all, I just want to help you tell your story. Let me help you. For information on my rates and services, please click the link below in the podcast description, jpenteloresco.wordpress.com, for more details. And that was my conversation with Robert J. Sawyer. I'm always going to owe Rob a debt of gratitude, because if it wasn't for him doing what he did, I never would have had the opportunity to become who I am as a podcaster. If he hadn't said podcast when he did, who knows where my life would be. So Rob, always my eternal gratitude. Best of luck on the Oppenheimer Alternative. You seem to be doing quite well with it. And to everybody else, Rob Sawyer is one of the most approachable guys you'll ever see in terms of meeting and interacting with his fan base. He is definitely one of the most professional people I've ever met. And honestly, one of the greats. Definitely check him out. And Rob, thank you for coming on my show. Well, I got to get working on hours 2 and 3 of the audiobook, so I'm going to let you guys go. That will do it for this episode of Just Joshing. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so in a number of different ways. Subscribe to it. I'm on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, Deezer, and soon Audible as well. And click on the subscribe, let people know I'm out there, share your posts, do it. I'm on Instagram as Just Joshing Podcast. Definitely go and subscribe there and see what I'm up to there. My webpage is jpenteloresco.wordpress.com. I do audio services. I do freelancing. Right? Hire me. I'm awesome. I promise. Check out my books, The Cloud Diver and L0. They are available on Amazon. Check out my merchandise at redbubble.com. Stay inspired, guys. Keep doing your thing. Keep surfing your chaos. This is 2020. The fact that you're still here doing your thing is truly amazing. Always remember that. Keep rocking.
Josh.